Stop right there. Look at me when I'm talking to you. You think you're above the law?
Hey, I'm still out above the law? I'm holding a coffee. What law did I break for you to touch me?
Touch your net. Watch your tone. I give the orders here.
Authority doesn't give you the right to humiliate me. You can strike my face, but you don't get to take my dignity.
What if I told you that one ordinary morning, one cup of coffee, and one slap exposed everything that's broken about how power is used in America? Picture this. A man stands on a city sidewalk, wearing a plain hoodie, minding his own business. No crime, no threat, no resistance. And yet, he's stopped, questioned, humiliated. Then it happens. A police officer raises his hand and slaps him across the face, not because the man fought back, not because he broke the law, but because he didn't bow his head low enough. The street goes silent, phones come out, hearts start pounding, and in that moment, when fear is expected, when anger would be understandable, when violence feels inevitable, the man does something that shocks everyone. He doesn't swing back, he doesn't shout, he doesn't run, he stands still. And what he says next doesn't just change the outcome of that moment, it forces an entire crowd, an entire police department, and eventually an entire country to confront an uncomfortable truth. Respect cannot be beaten into people, and dignity does not belong only to the powerful. This isn't just a story about one man. It's about every person who's been judged before being understood, every person who's been profiled for existing, every moment where silence felt safer than speaking up. And by the end of this story, you'll ask yourself a question that doesn't let go easily. If you were standing there, would you have stayed quiet or stood up too? Stay with us, because this story doesn't just expose racism, it shows what real strength looks like when hatred expects weakness. Subscribe now to the Racist Reality channel, where we tell the stories many want buried and shine light where silence has done too much harm. Watch until the end, because the way this moment ends might change the way you see power, justice, and what kind of America we're still fighting to become. A quiet morning, a loaded gaze. The city of Chicago woke the way it always did, without ceremony, without apology. Steel trains rattled overhead, shaking the bones of the loop as commuters poured out of stations like water forced through narrow pipes. The air was cool, sharp with the smell of metal, exhaust, and roasted coffee beans drifting from corner carts that had been set up before dawn. It was early fall, the kind of morning that made people pull their jackets a little tighter and walk a little faster, already bracing themselves for the day ahead. On the corner of State and Lake, a small coffee cart stood wedged between a newspaper stand and a stairwell leading down to the subway. Steam curled upward from its silver tanks, fogging the air in soft, fleeting clouds. Standing beside it was a man no one noticed. He wore a plain gray hoodie, the fabric slightly faded from years of washing. His jeans were unremarkable, his shoes scuffed at the toes. Nothing about him announced importance. Nothing about him demanded attention. That was exactly how Jordan Carter wanted it. At 38 years old, Jordan had lived most of his adult life under a microscope. He had grown used to crowds chanting his name, cameras hunting for his face, strangers forming opinions before he ever opened his mouth. Fame had followed him across oceans and borders, into arenas and hotels, into places where silence was supposed to live. But mornings like this, quiet, anonymous, ordinary, were rare gifts. Here he wasn't a champion. He wasn't a symbol. He wasn't a headline or a role or a responsibility. He was just another man waiting for coffee, standing shoulder to shoulder with people who had no idea who he was. And for once, that felt like freedom. Jordan shifted his weight slightly, hands tucked into the front pocket of his hoodie, eyes drifting across the street. A woman hurried past with a phone pressed to her ear, frustration tightening her voice. A jogger paused at the curb, hands on his knees catching his breath. Somewhere nearby, a delivery truck backfired, the sound echoing between buildings. Life moved forward, indifferent to everyone in it. The vendor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and practiced motions, poured coffee into a paper cup and slid it across the counter. "Large black," he said. $3. Jordan pulled a few bills from his wallet and handed them over. Their fingers brushed for a split second. Nothing dramatic, just human contact. Thanks, Jordan said. The vendor nodded. Have a good one. Jordan stepped back, lifting the cup. The heat soaked into his palms, grounding him. He inhaled deeply, letting the smell settle his nerves. He took a small sip. Bitter, strong, real. For a moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Then came the sound. Tires grinding against the curb. It wasn't loud. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just the low, deliberate roll of a police cruiser easing into place beside the sidewalk. Jordan didn't turn around right away. He didn't need to. Something old and instinctive tightened in his chest anyway. A familiar tension, learned through years of watching how quickly ordinary moments could become dangerous ones. Two car doors opened. Boots hit the pavement. Voices murmured, clipped and professional. Jordan stared into his coffee, willing himself to stay calm. He told himself what he had told himself 1,000 times before. You're not doing anything wrong. You're allowed to be here. You belong here. Still, the air around him felt different now, heavier, like the calm had been replaced by something watchful and sharp. Hey! The voice cut through the noise of the city. Jordan turned. Two uniformed officers stood a few feet away. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his face already flushed with impatience, his eyes scanning the street like he was searching for something that didn't belong. The other was leaner, younger, his jaw tight, his gaze darting between Jordan and the people beginning to slow nearby. The taller officer stepped forward. "What are you doing here?" he asked. The question wasn't casual. It wasn't curious. It was loaded, aimed, already carrying an answer it wanted to hear. Jordan blinked once, absorbing the tone before responding. "Getting coffee," he said evenly, lifting the cup slightly. The officer's eyes moved over him slowly, his hoodie, his hands, the way he stood. The look wasn't about safety, it was about judgment. "ID," the officer said. One word, flat, final. Jordan felt it then. The shift. The invisible line crossed, the one so many people knew by heart. The moment when an ordinary interaction stopped being ordinary, when innocence became irrelevant. "Excuse me?" Jordan asked. "I said ID," the officer repeated, louder this time. "Now." A ripple moved through the sidewalk. Someone paused. Someone else stopped walking altogether. A woman raised her phone, not even hiding it. Jordan glanced around briefly, then back at the officer. His voice stayed calm, respectful. "I didn't know identification was required to buy coffee." The second officer stepped closer, just enough to invade Jordan's space. "Don't get smart," he said. "You fit a description." Jordan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "A description of what?" he asked. The taller officer ignored the question entirely. "Wallet," he snapped. "Now." Jordan exhaled slowly. He had learned long ago that resistance, even polite resistance, was often treated as guilt. So he moved deliberately, carefully. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Every motion slow enough to be impossible to misinterpret. He handed over his ID. The officer snatched it, barely glancing at Jordan's face. He studied the card with a frown, turning it over as if expecting it to betray him. "Jordan Carter," he read aloud. A smirk tugged at his mouth. "Yeah, right. Shimai. That's my name," Jordan said quietly. The officer tilted his head. "Where are you from?" "Here," Jordan replied. "Chicago." The officer's smile vanished. "Don't lie to me." The street seemed to go still. Jordan could feel the eyes on him now, concerned, uneasy, sympathetic. The warmth from the coffee cup had faded. His hands felt cold. He had done everything right. And still, something was wrong. This was the moment so many people carried with them, long after it ended. The moment when you realized that compliance didn't guarantee safety, that politeness didn't earn protection, that being calm wasn't always enough. Jordan straightened, not in defiance, but in dignity. "Officer," he said carefully, "I'm not breaking any law." The officer laughed, short and sharp. "We'll decide that." And just like that, the quiet morning, The gift Jordan had been savoring slipped away. What replaced it was something heavier, something dangerous. Power had entered the space, and it had already chosen a target. And the lesson, still unspoken but painfully clear, hovered in the air. In America, some people are questioned not for what they do, but for who they are. The coffee cart steamed beside them, still offering warmth to anyone who dared step close. The city continued to move, unaware that another ordinary moment was being pulled apart. And Jordan stood there, steady and silent, knowing what too many had learned the hard way. Sometimes the fight begins before anyone throws a punch. Water chosen without cause. The words "will decide that" didn't echo loudly, but they landed hard. They hung between Jordan Carter and Officer Ryan Keller like a verdict already written, like a door closing behind him without his consent. The city kept moving, cars honking, footsteps passing, trains groaning overhead. But the space around Jordan felt sealed off now, as if an invisible wall had been drawn around him and the two men in uniform. Keller held Jordan's ID loosely between his fingers, flipping it back and forth with exaggerated disinterest. He hadn't asked any real questions yet. He hadn't explained anything. He hadn't needed to. His authority alone seemed to justify whatever came next. Jordan stood still, shoulders relaxed, chin level. Years of discipline had taught him something most people never had the chance to learn. Panic fed chaos. Control, real control, came from breath, posture, restraint. Still, beneath that control, something painful stirred. He had lived long enough to recognize the pattern. This wasn't about a crime. It wasn't about safety. It was about selection, about the quiet, unspoken decision that one person made in a uniform when they saw another person and decided, "You don't belong here the way you think you do." Keller glanced up from the ID, eyes narrowing. "So," he said, drawing the word out, "you live around here?" "Yes," Jordan answered. "Where exactly?" "Near South Shore." Keller exchanged a quick look with his partner, Officer Mark Denton. Denton's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a frown. Something in between. Something complicated. "Figures," Keller muttered. Jordan felt the words settle into his chest like a stone. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked quietly. Keller ignored the question. Instead, he took a step closer. Too close. Close enough that Jordan could smell the coffee on his breath, see the faint redness in his eyes, the impatience simmering just below the surface. "What brings you downtown this early?" Keller asked. "I told you," Jordan replied. "I'm getting coffee." Keller scoffed. "That's all?" "Yes." Denton shifted behind him, positioning himself just off Jordan's shoulder. Not touching him, not yet, but close enough to remind him that this was no longer a conversation between equals. "Hands out of your pockets," Denton said. Jordan complied immediately, letting his arms fall to his sides, palms open. Every small instruction was a test. Every movement was being evaluated, not for danger, but for obedience. A woman standing near the subway entrance frowned openly now. A man with a briefcase slowed his pace, eyes flicking between Jordan and the officers. The coffee vendor stood frozen behind his cart, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Keller held up the ID again. "This is yours?" "Yes." "You expect me to believe that?" Jordan met his gaze. "It's my legal identification." Keller tilted his head. "Funny, doesn't really match." "Match what?" Jordan asked. Keller's smile sharpened. "You know what?" The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The implication was loud enough. Jordan felt a familiar ache spread through his chest. Not fear exactly, but something heavier. The exhaustion of knowing that no matter how he spoke, how calmly he stood, how perfectly he followed instructions, there was a version of him already living in Keller's mind, and that version was dangerous. "I haven't done anything wrong," Jordan said. Keller laughed again, louder this time. "You people always say that." The phrase slipped out casually, like a habit that had never been challenged. For a brief second, the entire sidewalk seemed to react. A woman shook her head. Someone muttered under their breath. The air shifted, the way it did when something ugly revealed itself without shame. Jordan didn't flinch, but inside the words burned. "You people." It wasn't just about race. It was about separation, about erasing individuality, about turning a human being into a category that could be managed, controlled, dismissed. I'm just buying coffee, Jordan said again, his voice steady, almost gentle. Keller stepped closer still. Why are you really here? He demanded. Where are you headed? Are you working today? Are you carrying anything illegal? The questions came fast now, overlapping, designed not to find answers but to overwhelm. Jordan felt the weight of the crowd growing. Phones were out now, more than one. People weren't pretending anymore. Answer him, Denton snapped. I am answering, Jordan replied. Denton's hand came up suddenly, giving Jordan a short shove to the shoulder. It wasn't hard. It didn't knock him back, but it was deliberate. The crowd gasped as one. Hey, someone shouted. That's not necessary. Keller turned sharply toward the onlookers, his hand raised. Mind your business, he barked. This doesn't concern you. But it did. It concerned everyone who had ever stood where Jordan stood, heart pounding, knowing one wrong word or movement could change everything. It concerned everyone watching, because silence had always been part of how moments like this survived. Jordan straightened slowly, not aggressively, not definitely, just fully. He stood taller now, shoulders back, eyes steady. There was something in his posture, quiet, contained, that made Keller pause just for a fraction of a second. Officer, Jordan said, his voice firm but controlled, I've complied with everything you've asked. There's no reason to treat me this way? Keller's mouth curled into a smirk. What? He said. You think you're special? Jordan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence itself seemed to challenge Keller more than words ever could. Keller took it as disrespect. You think you can talk back to me? He snapped. He jabbed a finger into Jordan's chest. Denton moved slightly behind him, his hand brushing the belt at his waist. The tension thickened, heavy and electric. He's not resisting, someone yelled. You're on camera. Another voice followed. Keller ignored them all. You better watch that attitude, he said, leaning in close, before you end up in the back of my car. Jordan met his stare without blinking. I'm not breaking any law, he said quietly, and I won't be intimidated. The words were simple, honest. They infuriated Keller. Hands behind your back, Keller ordered. Jordan didn't move. For what reason? He asked. Suspicious behavior, Keller snapped. The crowd murmured. Even people who had stayed silent before now shook their heads. Phones zoomed closer. Every second was being recorded. Denton reached out and grabbed Jordan's arm. Jordan didn't pull away. He didn't strike back. But he didn't submit either. He held his ground, not as a challenge, but as a statement. Sir, Jordan said calmly, you're making a serious mistake. Keller stepped forward, shouting now, his voice rising in pitch and volume. You think you can tell me what a mistake is? You think you're better than us? The coffee vendor finally found his voice. Officer, he said nervously, he's just a customer. Stay out of it, Keller snapped, waving him off. Then came the moment no one could take back. Keller's hand moved fast. A sharp, unmistakable smack echoed through the air. It cut through the city noise like a crack of thunder. The slap landed across Jordan's face. Time seemed to stop. The crowd fell silent. A paper cup fluttered from someone's hand and hit the pavement, rolling slowly until it came to rest against the curb. Jordan didn't move. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't shout. He stood there, breathing slowly, his eyes locked on the man who had just struck him. In that silence, something broke. Not just in Jordan's face, but in the illusion that this was ever about law enforcement. And everyone watching felt it. The pain, the injustice, the truth. Sometimes a person is chosen not because they did something wrong, but because someone else needed to feel powerful. And the cost of that choice is carried by the one who never asked to be part of the lesson. You people. The sound of the slap didn't fade the way noise usually did. It stayed. It hovered in the air like a bruise that hadn't surfaced yet, like a memory already being formed before anyone could stop it. For a few heartbeats, the city seemed to hold itself still. No horns, no footsteps, no chatter. Even the trains overhead felt distant, as if the world had leaned back to witness what had just happened. Jordan Carter stood exactly where he was. The skin along his cheek burned, not with the sharp sting of pain alone, but with something heavier. something older. The kind of pain that came from being struck, not just by a hand, but by a decision. A judgment made long before that morning, long before he'd stepped onto the sidewalk, long before he'd lifted a cup of coffee to his lips. He didn't raise his hand to his face. He didn't blink. He simply breathed, slowly, deliberately. Officer Ryan Keller took half a step back, then squared his shoulders as if to convince himself and everyone else that what he'd done was justified. "Now maybe you'll learn who's in charge," he said, his voice sharp, defensive, louder than it needed to be. That was when the street came back to life. "You can't do that," a woman shouted. "That's assault," someone else yelled. "He didn't do anything." Phones rose higher. Screens glowed brighter. The truth was being captured from every angle now, stitched together by ordinary people who refused to look away. Jordan heard the voices, but he didn't turn toward them. His eyes remained fixed on Keller, calm and steady, not challenging, measuring. He spoke softly. "Are you done, officer?" The question cut through the noise. Keller blinked, thrown off by the tone more than the words. "What did you just say?" Jordan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I asked," he repeated evenly. "Are you done?" For the first time since stepping out of the cruiser, Keller hesitated. The response he'd expected, anger, fear, pleading, never came. Instead, there was only control, discipline, the kind that unsettled men who relied on dominance to feel secure. Denton shifted behind Keller, his confidence visibly wavering. "Hey, man," he muttered under his breath. "Maybe we should—" Keller silenced him with a sharp glance. Jordan exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible. "I told you," he said. "You're making a mistake." Keller scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. "You don't get to tell me anything." Jordan's eyes softened, not with submission, but with understanding. Understanding of how quickly power could rot when it wasn't checked by humility. Around them, the crowd pressed closer. No one touched the officers. No one crossed the invisible line. But their presence mattered. Witnessing mattered. A woman near the front whispered almost to herself, "He's someone important, isn't he?" Jordan heard it. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth didn't depend on his name. Keller tried to reclaim the moment, lifting his chin, raising his voice. "Everyone back off," he shouted. "This is police business." No one moved. A man near the coffee cart shook his head. "You hit him for no reason." Another voice followed. "That's not law enforcement." Keller's face reddened. "Quiet, or I'll start making arrests." Jordan turned his head slightly, not breaking eye contact for long. "Why are you angry, officer?" he asked quietly. The question wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. To look inward, to confront something uncomfortable. Keller's jaw tightened. "Because people like you think you can talk back to us," he snapped. Jordan paused. "People like me?" he repeated. The words landed with weight. Keller didn't answer. He didn't have to. Everyone knew what he meant. You people. The phrase had been said earlier, tossed out casually, but now it loomed larger, heavier. It wasn't just insulting, it was revealing. It stripped away the thin veneer of professionalism and exposed the belief underneath that some people were perpetual suspects, that respect was conditional, that authority existed to remind certain bodies of their place. Jordan felt the ache deepen, not for himself alone, but for all the moments like this that never made the news, for the people who didn't have crowds or cameras, for the ones who flinched because they'd learned flinching was safer than standing still. He took a slow breath. "I've met people with power before," he said calmly. "Real power doesn't need to shout." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded. Others pressed record again, knowing a line like that mattered. Keller sneered. "You think you're clever?" Jordan didn't respond. "Keep talking," Keller continued, "and I'll make sure you spend the night in a cell." Jordan glanced down briefly, then back up. "I've spent nights in worse places," he said. "A cell doesn't scare me." Denton stepped forward, trying to reassert control. "You're lucky we don't cuff you right now." Jordan didn't flinch. "You're lucky I'm patient," he replied. The words weren't threatening. They were factual, measured, And that frightened Denton more than anger ever could. Keller's hand twitched near his belt. A collective gasp moved through the crowd. "Don't!" someone shouted. "He's not doing anything!" Jordan raised both hands slowly, palms open. "No need for weapons," he said. "I'm unarmed. I've done nothing wrong." He took a small step forward, not aggressively, but deliberately. "You say you protect the public," he continued. "Then protect your own dignity." Keller's face flushed deep red. He had never been spoken to like this, not with shouting, not with fear, but with quiet authority, enough to expose the cracks in his own. "Turn around," Keller shouted. "Hands on your head." Jordan didn't move. "No," he said. The single word seemed to stun everyone. Keller blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no," Jordan repeated. "I won't be humiliated for no reason." Applause broke out, tentative at first, then louder. People began chanting, "Leave him alone! Leave him alone!" Denton leaned closer to Keller, his voice low. "Man, maybe we should stop." Keller ignored him. "You don't know who you're messing with," Keller said, his voice cracking slightly. Jordan's expression remained calm. "You're right," he said. "You don't know who I am, and that's fine." He looked past Keller now, addressing the crowd as much as the officers. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he continued. "I'm asking for respect, the kind every human deserves." The words hit harder than the slap, because they were undeniable. Keller swallowed, his bravado thinning. "Stop talking," he warned weakly, "before you make this worse for yourself." Jordan tilted his head slightly. "Worse?" he asked. "You already hit a man for buying coffee." Cheers erupted. Shouts filled the street. "We got it on camera." "You're in the wrong." Keller's hand twitched again, then fell to his side. For a brief moment, everyone feared what might come next. But deep down, even Keller knew it. He was cornered. Not by Jordan's strength, but by his own words. Jordan stepped back, lowering his hands. "I'm not here to fight you," he said. "I'm here to remind you that you can't slap respect into people." He paused. "You earn it." The sentence lingered, heavier than any threat. Denton's voice shook. "Ryan, I think we should stop." Keller snapped, panic leaking through his anger. "He's under arrest." Jordan shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "You're under judgment by every person standing here." Dozens of phones recorded the moment. What had begun as a routine stop had become something else entirely. A reckoning unfolding in real time. Jordan stood tall, the red mark on his cheek visible now, glowing against his skin. It wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a scar of dignity. And the lesson, painful and clear, pressed into every witness watching. Discrimination doesn't always announce itself with slurs or shouting. Sometimes it shows up as suspicion dressed in uniform, as authority unchallenged, as the quiet belief that some people deserve less grace than others. But so does resistance. Sometimes resistance looks like staying calm when you're struck, like refusing to shrink, like standing still long enough for the world to see what's really happening. And in that stillness, something powerful began to shift. The slap that broke the silence. The street did not return to normal after the slap. It couldn't. Something had been broken, something fragile but essential. Not just Jordan Carter's skin, not just the thin line of peace that had existed moments earlier, but the shared agreement that authority would protect instead of harm. The red mark on Jordan's cheek bloomed slowly, visibly, as if the body itself were refusing to hide what had been done. Officer Ryan Keller stood rigid, chest rising and falling too fast, eyes darting. Not with confidence now, but with the frantic calculation of a man who had gone too far and knew it. Still, pride forced him forward. Pride had always been louder than reason. "Now maybe you understand," Keller snapped, his voice brittle. "Who's in charge here?" The words sounded hollow the moment they left his mouth, because no one believed them anymore. The crowd erupted, not all at once, but in overlapping waves of outrage and disbelief. "You can't do that! That's assault! He didn't touch you!" Phones rose higher, arms extended, hands shook, not with fear now, but with adrenaline. The instinct to record wasn't about spectacle. It was about protection, about proof, about making sure the truth survived the moment. Jordan stood still. That was what unsettled everyone most. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't even lift a hand to his face. He inhaled through his nose, exhaled through his mouth, slow and measured, the way he had been taught long ago when the world tried to knock the air out of him. His eyes remained locked on Keller, not angry, not pleading, just present. It was a look that asked a single question without words. Was it worth it? For a brief second, Keller faltered. His jaw tightened. His gaze flickered away, then snapped back, defiance scrambling to cover doubt. Jordan broke the silence gently. "Are you done, officer?" The simplicity of the question cut through the noise like a blade. Keller blinked. "What?" Jordan didn't move. "Are you done?" Denton shifted beside him, uncertainty plain on his face now. The situation had slipped beyond procedure, beyond training manuals and muscle memory. This was something else. This was exposure. "You don't get to ask questions," Keller barked, but his voice wavered. "You don't get to decide when this ends." Jordan nodded once, slowly. "You already decided when it crossed the line," he said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. A man clenched his fists, jaw set, fighting the urge to step forward. The coffee vendor stood frozen, his hands gripping the edge of his cart as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. Keller tried to regain control. "Everyone back up," he shouted, sweeping an arm toward the crowd. "This is police business." No one moved. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of judgment, full of memories, full of every moment people had swallowed anger because speaking up felt too dangerous. "You hit him for nothing," someone called out. "You're supposed to protect people," another voice added. Keller's face flushed deeper, the mask of authority slipping. "Quiet," he yelled, "or I'll start making arrests." Jordan tilted his head slightly, eyes never leaving Keller's. "Why are you so angry?" he asked quietly. The question landed harder than any accusation. Keller bristled. "Because people like you think you can challenge us." Jordan paused. "People like me?" he repeated. The words echoed, slow, deliberate. Keller didn't answer. He didn't have to. The meaning was already bleeding through the cracks. Jordan took a breath, the city air filling his lungs. When he spoke again, his voice carried, not with volume, but with clarity. "I've stood across from men who wanted to hurt me," he said. "Men with power, men with weapons. Men who believed fear made them strong." A murmur moved through the crowd. "And do you know what I learned?" he continued. "Real strength doesn't need to humiliate someone to prove itself." A few people began to clap, soft at first, respectful, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Keller scoffed, but the sound was thin. "You think you're teaching a lesson?" Jordan's gaze softened, not with pity, but with something close to sadness. "I think you're showing one," he said. Denton stepped forward, trying to salvage what little control remained. "Sir, just turn around," he said, voice strained. "Let's make this easy." Jordan looked at him then, really looked. "I'm not making this hard," he replied. "I'm standing still." Keller's hand twitched again, hovering near his belt. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Don't!" someone shouted. Jordan raised his hands slowly, palms open, movements deliberate and calm. "No need for a weapon," he said. "I'm unarmed. I've been unarmed this whole time." He took one small step forward, not threatening, not aggressive. "You say you serve the public," he continued. "Then serve the truth. Serve restraint. Serve the responsibility that comes with that badge." Keller's breathing quickened. His authority had always depended on one thing: compliance. And Jordan was refusing, not with violence, not with insults, but with dignity. "Turn around," Keller shouted again. "Hands on your head." Jordan didn't move. "No," he said. The word landed heavy, final. A cheer broke out before anyone could stop it. Not wild, not mocking, affirming. People clapped, nodded, called out encouragement. Denton leaned closer to Keller, panic in his eyes. "Ryan, man, stop. This is bad." Keller ignored him. "You don't know who you're messing with," he snarled. Jordan nodded calmly. You're right, he said. And that's the point. He looked out at the crowd now, meeting eyes one by one. I'm not asking to be treated better than anyone else, he said. I'm asking to be treated like everyone else. The words sank in, because that was all anyone ever wanted. Keller's voice cracked. You're making this worse for yourself. Jordan tilted his head slightly. Worse? He asked. You already crossed the worst line. He gestured subtly to his cheek. You hit a man for buying coffee. The crowd erupted. That's right. We saw it. You're wrong. Keller's shoulders sagged for a fraction of a second before stiffening again. He was cornered now, not by Jordan's size or strength, but by the undeniable truth of what had happened in front of witnesses. I'm not here to fight you, Jordan said, lowering his hands. I'm here to remind you of something you've forgotten. He paused. You can't slap respect into people. Silence fell again. You earn it. Denton swallowed hard. Ryan, this is done. Keller snapped back, desperation leaking into his voice. He's under arrest. Jordan shook his head slowly. No, he said. You are. Keller stared at him. What? You're under judgment, Jordan clarified. By every person here, by every camera, by your own conscience. Dozens of phones recorded the moment. The story had already escaped the street. It was alive now, moving faster than Keller could control. Jordan stood tall, the mark on his cheek glowing red against his skin. It wasn't a sign of defeat. It was evidence. Evidence of what happens when power forgets its purpose. Evidence of how quickly authority can turn cruel when unchecked by empathy. And for the people watching, especially those who had lived moments like this themselves, the pain surged not just from what they saw, but from what they remembered. Every time they'd been followed in a store, every time they'd been stopped for no reason, every time they swallowed anger because survival demanded silence, Jordan's stillness gave those memories a voice. The slap had been meant to dominate. Instead, it was exposed. And in that exposure, something irreversible had begun. The illusion was gone. The truth was standing in plain sight, and everyone felt it. The strength of refusal. The moment Keller shouted, "He's under arrest!" Something shifted, not forward, not backward, but inward. It was the sound of authority trying to reclaim a story it had already lost. Jordan Carter didn't flinch. He didn't tense. He didn't brace for impact the way so many people learned to do when voices rose and hands hovered too close to belts. Instead, he did something that felt almost radical in its simplicity. He stood still, not rigid, not defiant, just grounded, feet planted, shoulders open, chin level. His posture wasn't a challenge. It was a refusal to perform fear, a refusal to shrink, a refusal to become what Keller expected him to be. No, Jordan said again calmly. The word traveled through the crowd like a spark. Keller stared at him, disbelief etched across his face. You don't get to say no, Jordan met his gaze. I just did. Denton took an involuntary step back. He hadn't expected this. Not the crowd, not the cameras, not the way Jordan's calm had turned the street into a courtroom without walls. People began speaking all at once now. Leave him alone. He didn't do anything. We're recording. The noise wasn't chaotic. It was focused, protective. It carried the collective weight of people who had learned, often too late, that silence was expensive. Jordan turned slightly, addressing the crowd without taking his eyes fully off the officers. I'm okay, he said, not loudly, but clearly enough to be heard. Just stay where you are. The instruction wasn't about control. It was about care. Keller's breathing grew shallow. You're making a mistake, he snapped, the words sounding more like a plea than a warning now. Jordan nodded once. I know. The honesty disarmed him. I know because I've seen this moment before, Jordan continued. I've watched what happens when power confuses obedience with respect. He lifted a hand, not to gesture wildly, but to draw attention to the stillness he was holding together by will alone. Look at me, he said. I'm not running. I'm not resisting. I'm not threatening you. Keller's jaw worked as if chewing on a response that wouldn't come. And yet, Jordan went on, you hit me. The sentence landed softly, devastating in its simplicity. You hit me, he repeated, because I didn't give you what you wanted. A murmur spread through the crowd. Agreement, recognition, grief. Denton swallowed hard. "Ryan," he said quietly, "this is over." Keller snapped back, louder than necessary. "Shut up!" The crack in his voice betrayed him. Jordan watched it happen with the same steady focus he learned to use in the ring. The moment when an opponent's confidence faltered, when ego started making decisions instead of discipline. But this wasn't a fight Jordan wanted to win. This was a moment he wanted the world to see. "You think this is about me talking back?" Jordan said, his voice even. "But it's not." He gestured toward the crowd now. Men and women of different ages, races, jobs, all drawn together by the gravity of what they were witnessing. "It's about what happens when authority forgets that it's supposed to serve," he continued, "when a badge becomes permission instead of responsibility." A woman near the front nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. Jordan felt the sting on his face again, not sharper, but deeper now. The body remembered, the mind cataloged. Pain had a way of traveling beyond skin. He didn't hide it. "Every person here has a story," he said. "A moment when they were made to feel small for no reason, when they were judged before they were understood." His gaze returned to Keller. "This is yours." Keller shook his head violently. "You don't know what you're talking about." Jordan didn't argue. "I know what I felt," he said, "and I know what everyone here saw." Keller's hand drifted up, palm open, as if he were about to point or command again, then hesitated. He looked around and finally seemed to register the phones, the faces, the undeniable witness of the moment. For the first time, fear flickered across his expression, not fear of Jordan, fear of exposure. Jordan softened his tone. "You still have a choice," he said. "You can stop." The offer hung there, unexpected, undeserved, real. Denton leaned in again, urgency rising. "Ryan, please!" Keller clenched his fists. His authority had always relied on escalation, on making the moment louder until it bent in his favor. But the louder he got now, the smaller he seemed. Jordan took a slow breath. "I don't want this to end with more harm," he said. "I don't want anyone to get hurt. Not me. Not you." The crowd quieted, sensing the gravity in his words. "I want this to end with understanding," Jordan continued, "because if it doesn't, if we keep confusing dominance with leadership, then this keeps happening to someone else, somewhere else, tomorrow." A man in the back shouted, "He's right!" Jordan nodded once in acknowledgement. Keller's voice cracked again. "You think you're better than me?" The question slipped out before Keller could stop it. Jordan shook his head. "No," he said gently. "I think we're both human." The sentence landed with more force than any insult ever could. "You're not above the law," Jordan added, "but neither am I beneath it." The crowd erupted into applause. Stronger now, steadier, not celebratory, but affirming, as if people were recognizing a truth they had always known, but rarely heard spoken aloud. Keller took a step back. Jordan felt it, the tipping point, the moment when control slipped from the hands that had tried to squeeze it too tight. "You don't know who I am," Keller muttered, grasping for ground. Jordan nodded again. "That's right." He paused. "And you didn't need to." The lesson was unmistakable now. No one should have to be known, famous, or powerful to deserve dignity. Jordan turned slightly, scanning the faces in the crowd. He saw anger, fear, hope, all coexisting in the same space. "This shouldn't require courage," he said. "It should be normal." He looked back at Keller. "You don't need to arrest me," he continued. "You need to look at what you did." Keller opened his mouth, then closed it again. Silence stretched. Somewhere down the street, a siren wailed faintly, growing louder with each passing second. Jordan heard it and felt a strange calm settle over him. Whatever came next was out of his hands now. He had done what he could, stood still, spoke the truth, refused to be broken. He lowered his hands fully, arms relaxed at his sides. "I'm not here to humiliate you," he said. "I'm here to stop this moment from becoming something worse." The crowd breathed together, as if one body. Keller's shoulders slumped slightly. The fight had drained out of him, leaving behind confusion and shame. The siren grew closer. Jordan felt the sting on his cheek pulse again, a reminder of the cost of refusing to submit quietly. But he also felt something else, something stronger, connection. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were with him. And in that shared stillness, the pain transformed. It didn't disappear. It didn't need to. It became purpose. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't to fight back. It's to stand still long enough for the truth to be seen. And in that stillness, Jordan Carter showed everyone watching what real strength looked like. Not fists raised, not voices shouted, but dignity held firmly in the face of injustice. The sirens were close now, and the reckoning they carried was no longer avoidable. Recognition and reckoning. The sirens didn't arrive all at once. They approached slowly, their distant wail threading through the city noise like a warning the street could feel before it fully heard. The sound curled into the space Jordan Carter occupied, mixing with the low hum of voices, the glow of phone screens, the uneasy breath of two officers who no longer seemed sure of themselves. Jordan remained still. The red mark on his cheek had deepened now, a visible echo of what had been done to him. It pulsed with each heartbeat, not screaming for attention, but refusing to disappear. Pain had a way of insisting on being seen. Keller noticed it too. His eyes flicked to Jordan's face, then away again, as if looking directly at the mark might force him to confront something he wasn't ready to face. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by a brittle defensiveness that cracked with every passing second. The crowd had grown. Office workers on their way to morning meetings had stopped. Delivery drivers leaned against their trucks. A group of students stood shoulder to shoulder near the subway entrance. They weren't shouting now. They weren't chanting. They were watching, witnessing. Jordan felt their presence like a hand on his back, steady, grounding. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted an audience, but he understood the power of it. Too many moments like this happened unseen. Too many ended without witnesses. Keller cleared his throat, trying to reclaim his voice. "Everybody needs to back up," he said, but the words lacked authority now. "You're interfering with police business." No one moved. A man near the edge of the crowd shook his head. "You already crossed that line." Jordan heard the quiet conviction in the man's voice and felt something loosen inside his chest. Not relief, recognition. He looked down briefly, then back up at Keller. "You asked for my ID," Jordan said calmly. "I gave it to you." Keller stiffened. "You demanded answers," Jordan continued. "I answered." Denton shifted uneasily beside his partner, his earlier confidence replaced by a hollow look of regret. "And then," Jordan added, his voice steady but weighted now, "you raised your hand." The words were not accusatory. They were factual, unavoidable. Keller opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. His eyes darted again, to the phones, to the faces, to the growing circle of people who had decided this moment mattered. That was when it happened. From somewhere near the back of the crowd, a teenager's voice cut through the silence. "Wait," the boy said. "Hold on." Heads turned. The boy stood on the edge of the sidewalk, phone raised, his brows knitted together as he zoomed in on Jordan's face. He looked from the screen to the man in the hoodie, back and forth, disbelief spreading across his expression. "That's," he started, then stopped, shaking his head. "That looks like Jordan Carter." A murmur rippled outward. "What? No way. Jordan Carter." The name moved through the crowd like a current, gathering speed and weight as it passed from mouth to mouth. People leaned in closer, phones lifting higher, whispers sharpening into recognition. Keller frowned. "What are they saying?" he muttered to Denton. Denton swallowed hard. I think they're saying that's Jordan Carter." Keller scoffed reflexively. "The boxer?" The teenager nodded emphatically. "Yeah, that's him. Look." He turned his phone around, showing a photo pulled up on his screen. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same eyes, the same quiet intensity, the same unmistakable presence that couldn't quite be hidden by a hoodie. The murmurs grew louder. "No way. That's really him? Why would he be dressed like that?" Jordan felt the shift immediately. It wasn't relief that washed over him. It wasn't vindication. It was something closer to disappointment. He closed his eyes for just a moment, a long breath passing through him. When he opened them again, He raised a hand, not to wave, not to acknowledge the recognition, but to quiet it. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said softly. The words cut through the noise. People stilled, drawn to the calm authority in his voice. "It matters how you treat people you don't recognize," Jordan continued, "because most of the people you meet will never have a name you know." Applause broke out, not explosive, but sincere. Keller's face was drained of color. He looked down at the ID still clutched in his hand, finally reading it properly this time. The letters seemed to rearrange themselves in his mind, the reality sinking in piece by piece. Jordan Carter, the man he had slapped, the man standing calmly in front of him, the man whose face now appeared on dozens of screens across the street. Keller's lips parted slightly. "I didn't know," he muttered. Jordan met his gaze. "That's the problem," he said gently. "You didn't care to know." The words landed like a verdict. Denton's shoulders sagged. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes downcast. "We messed up," he whispered. Keller straightened abruptly, panic flaring into defiance. "I don't care who he is," he snapped, louder now. "Nobody's above the law." Jordan nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "Neither are you." The crowd erupted into cheers. Phones shook as people adjusted their grip, documenting every second. Live streams were already circulating. Comments poured in faster than anyone could read them. "That's Jordan Carter. Why are they treating him like that? Look how calm he is." A chant began, soft at first, then stronger. "Respect, respect, respect." Keller raised his hands trying to quiet the crowd, but his authority was gone, replaced by something more powerful, collective judgment. Jordan watched him, not with triumph, but with sadness. "You see what's happening?" Jordan said quietly. "This isn't about fame. This is about exposure." He gestured subtly toward the crowd. "This is what happens when people stop being afraid to watch." The sirens were close now. A police cruiser pulled into view at the end of the block, lights flashing, drawing the attention of everyone present. Relief and dread mingled in the air. Jordan felt a shift inside himself. Not tension, but readiness. Whatever came next would matter. The crowd parted slightly as the cruiser slowed, cameras tracking every movement. Keller stood frozen, his earlier bravado replaced by something that looked very much like fear. Jordan remained composed. The teenager who had first recognized him stared up at Jordan with wide eyes. "Man," he said quietly, "you didn't even fight back." Jordan glanced at him and offered a small, almost sad smile. "Not every fight is won with fists," he replied. The boy nodded slowly, the lesson settling into him. The cruiser came to a stop, doors opened. And in that moment, between recognition and consequence, between exposure and accountability, the truth stood naked in the street. If this could happen to someone the world admired, someone with influence and a voice, what happened every day to people whose names would never be spoken aloud? Jordan felt that truth like a weight on his chest. He straightened, not for himself, but for them, because the reckoning had begun. And it wasn't just about who he was. It was about who America chose to protect when no one was watching. The truth drops like thunder. The cruiser rolled to a stop with a soft hiss of brakes, lights washing the street in red and blue. The colors slid across faces, across phones, across the red mark on Jordan Carter's cheek. An unintentional spotlight on a wound that no one could deny. The crowd shifted, parting instinctively, not out of fear this time, but out of anticipation. Something final was arriving, something that would decide whether this moment ended as another buried incident or as a reckoning. A door opened, then another. From the driver's side stepped Captain Elaine Morales. She was not tall, but she carried herself with the calm certainty of someone who had learned the hard way what power was for and what it was not. Years on the job had etched lines at the corners of her eyes, not from cruelty, but from vigilance. She took in the scene in seconds. The crowd, the phones, the two officers standing stiff and shaken, and at the center of it all, a man in a gray hoodie with blood rushing beneath his skin where a hand had struck him. Her eyes landed on Jordan and stopped. For half a breath, disbelief crossed her face, then recognition. Then something else, respect edged with alarm. She moved quickly now, purposeful. "What's going on here?" she asked, voice steady, caring without shouting. Keller turned toward her, relief and panic colliding in his posture. "Captain, this man, he was being uncooperative." Morales didn't look at Jordan when she responded. She looked at Keller. "Uncooperative how?" she asked. Keller opened his mouth. I closed it. I tried again. He refused to comply. "With what?" Morales pressed. Keller glanced at Denton, who stared at the ground. Morales followed his gaze, then turned back to Jordan. She took in his stillness, the open hands at his sides, the mark on his cheek. Her jaw tightened. "Sir," she said to Jordan, tone shifting, "are you injured?" Jordan nodded once. "I was struck." Morales inhaled slowly. The crowd murmured, the sound low and charged. Morales turned back to Keller, her voice colder now. "Did you strike him?" Keller swallowed. "Captain, I didn't know who he was." The words spilled out, desperate. Morales' eyes hardened. "That's not an answer." Jordan spoke then, gently before the moment could tilt into something sharper. "Captain," he said, meeting her gaze, "I didn't come here to cause trouble." Morales turned fully toward him now, posture straightening. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "with respect, what happened here is unacceptable." The crowd reacted instantly. Cheers rose, phones shook. Someone shouted, "That's right." Jordan raised a hand slightly, asking for quiet. "This isn't about me," he said. "Not really." Morales studied him, really studied him, and seemed to understand. She nodded once. "Officers Keller and Denton," she said, turning back to them, "you are relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending investigation." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Keller froze. "Captain, hand over your badges," Morales said, her voice firm as steel. Denton moved first, unpinning his badge with trembling fingers and placing it in Morales' open palm. Keller hesitated, pride warring with fear. Finally, his hand shook as he removed the badge and surrendered it. The sound of metal against metal echoed louder than the slap had. Jordan felt a tightness in his chest, not satisfaction, not triumph, but a sober acknowledgement of consequence. Accountability was not revenge, it was a necessity. Morales turned slightly toward the crowd. "If you recorded this incident," she said, "please submit your footage to Internal Affairs. Every second will be reviewed." Cheers broke out again, this time tinged with relief. Jordan stepped forward just enough to be heard. "Captain," he said, "I don't want these men destroyed." The crowd quieted immediately. Morales looked at him, surprised. "I want them to learn," Jordan continued, "because what they did today doesn't just reflect on them. It reflects on every officer who puts on that uniform with good intentions." Morales nodded slowly. "Understood." Jordan turned to Keller then. The officer's face had collapsed inward, anger replaced by shame, bluster by disbelief. "You asked for my ID," Jordan said quietly. "I gave it to you. You demanded answers. I answered. You raised your hand." Keller opened his mouth to speak, but Jordan raised a hand, not harshly, not to silence him with force, but with calm authority. "I stayed calm," Jordan continued, "not because I was afraid, but because I wanted you to see what power without discipline looks like." The words struck Keller harder than any accusation. "You think I embarrassed you?" Jordan asked. "No. You embarrassed yourself the moment you forgot what your badge stands for." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Some clapped softly. Others nodded, tears in their eyes. Keller's voice broke. "Sir, I didn't know." Jordan shook his head gently. "That's the problem," he said. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me like a human being." The truth of it silenced the street. Morales stood with her hands clasped behind her back, absorbing every word. Jordan turned outward now, addressing the crowd. Not as a celebrity, not as an official, but as a citizen. "This isn't about a famous name," he said. "It's about every person who's been judged before being understood, about every person who's been treated as a threat before being treated as a neighbor." He paused, letting the words settle. "Authority without empathy is dangerous," he continued. "Power without humility is useless." The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in agreement. Applause thundered down the street, echoing off glass and steel. Morales took a step closer to Jordan. "Sir," she said, "for the record," Jordan lifted his hand gently. "Rank shouldn't decide how we treat each other," he said. "Humanity should." A hush fell again, this time reverent. Jordan took a breath, then delivered the words that would carry far beyond this street, beyond this city. "My name is Jordan Carter," he said, voice steady, "and as of this week, I've been appointed Police Commissioner Liaison for International Partnerships." The crowd exploded. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. Phones tilted wildly as people tried to capture the moment their brains were still catching up to. Keller's face drained completely. Denton stared at the ground as if it might open and swallow him. Jordan continued, his tone unchanged. "I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't need to," he said. "No one should have to announce their importance to be treated with respect." Morales exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling over her. Jordan looked directly at Keller. "I don't want your apology," he said. "I want your awareness." Keller nodded numbly, tears welling despite himself. Jordan stepped back, turning once more to the crowd. "Let this be about more than one moment," he said. "Let it be about what we choose to do when we witness injustice, whether we stay silent or whether we stand together." The applause returned, stronger now, unified. Morales motioned to additional officers to secure the area, but the mood had shifted completely. This was no longer a scene of conflict, it was a lesson. And as Jordan stood there, face marked, voice calm, presence unshaken, the pain of what had happened did not disappear, but it transformed. It became proof. Proof that dignity could withstand humiliation. Proof that calm could disarm cruelty. Proof that America could be better if people were willing to see one another clearly. The truth had dropped like thunder, and nothing on that street would ever be the same again. Accountability, healing, and a stronger America. When the badges changed hands, the street exhaled. It wasn't a relief exactly. It was something deeper, something heavier but cleaner, like the moment after a storm when the air still smells of rain and the ground remembers where the lightning struck. Officer Ryan Keller stood motionless, his badge no longer pinned to his chest, his hands empty, his posture smaller than it had been at any point that morning. Officer Mark Denton stood beside him, eyes fixed on the pavement, shoulders slumped under the weight of a truth he could no longer outrun. Captain Elaine Morales gave a quiet order to the officers who had arrived with her. "Secure the area," she said. "Give people space." But no one rushed away. The crowd stayed. They weren't there for spectacle anymore. They were there because something rare had happened, something honest. They had witnessed harm. They had spoken up. And for once, accountability had answered. Jordan Carter stood at the center of it all, still in his gray hoodie, still holding himself with the same calm restraint that had carried him through the worst of it. The sting on his cheek throbbed faintly now, no longer sharp but persistent, a reminder etched into his skin. Morales stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. "You could have handled this very differently," she said, "and no one would have blamed you." Jordan nodded. "I know." "Thank you," Morales added quietly, "for choosing restraint." Jordan met her eyes. "We all serve the same people," he said. "The difference is how we choose to do it." Morales absorbed that, then turned to address the crowd. "I want to thank every person here who recorded, who spoke up, who refused to look away," she said. "This is how accountability begins." Applause followed, not loud, not wild, but steady and sincere. Jordan felt something shift inside him then. Not pride, not victory, but resolve. He turned slowly toward Keller. The officer looked up, eyes rimmed red, shame replacing the anger that had fueled him earlier. "You see this crowd?" Jordan asked softly, gesturing around them. "They didn't come here for me. They came here because they believed something was wrong." Keller swallowed hard. "You still have a choice," Jordan continued. "What you do after today matters more than what you did before it." Keller nodded, barely able to speak. "Yes, sir." Jordan corrected him gently. "Just Jordan." The crowd began to disperse gradually, conversations breaking out in low voices. People hugged. Some wiped tears from their eyes. A woman held her phone close to her chest, whispering to a friend, "I've never seen that happen before." A man near the coffee cart shook his head in disbelief. He didn't even raise his voice. Jordan heard those words and felt their weight, because that was the part that stayed with people. Not the slap, not the shouting, the calm. Within an hour, the footage was everywhere. Clips shot from different angles stitched together across platforms. Raw, unfiltered, impossible to deny. Headlines appeared faster than anyone could keep track of them. A man slapped by police responds with dignity. The crowd witnesses a rare moment of accountability. Jordan Carter shows what real leadership looks like. People slowed the video down, analyzing the moment Keller's confidence collapsed. Others focused on Jordan's words, overlaying them with music, sharing them as quotes, as reminders, as lessons. Comment sections filled with stories. "This happened to me last year. I wasn't famous enough for anyone to step in. I wish someone had stood up for my brother like that." What began as a single incident became a mirror, reflecting experiences millions had carried quietly for years. Jordan stayed silent through it all. No interviews, no statements, no appearances. He understood the power of silence too well to waste it. The next evening, at exactly 9 o'clock, he posted a single sentence on his official account. "No one should be judged by appearance. Respect must be our first language." Nothing else. The message spread like fire. Millions shared it within hours. Athletes, actors, teachers, parents, police officers, activists, people from every background adding their own stories beneath it. Respect isn't a weakness. Calm is powerful. This is the America I want. Days later, at a small press conference, Jordan finally spoke. He stood behind a simple podium, wearing a navy suit, no entourage behind him, no script in front of him. His cheeks still carried a faint discoloration, visible, honest. "I don't hate those officers," he said quietly. "I forgive them." The room went still. "What I hope," he continued, "is that they learn, not for me, but for the next person they meet on the street. Everyone deserves dignity." Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras whirred. "If I had reacted with anger," Jordan added, "I would have proved the wrong thing. By staying calm, I showed what respect actually looks like." That line became the moral center of the story. Police academies referenced the footage in ethics classes. Universities invited Jordan to speak about leadership without ego. Departments across the country quietly reviewed training protocols, discussing de-escalation not as theory, but as necessity. As for Keller and Denton, investigations proceeded. Accountability followed its course, not erased, not rushed, but taken seriously. Jordan never spoke their names again. Weeks later, on another ordinary morning, Jordan stood at a different coffee cart on a different street. No cameras, no crowd, just the hum of the city waking up. A uniformed officer stood on the corner nearby. He noticed Jordan, straightened instinctively, and gave a respectful nod. Jordan returned it. No words were exchanged. A teenager walking past whispered to his friend, "That's the guy who didn't fight back." Jordan heard it and smiled faintly, because that quiet understanding, meant more to him than any title. By the end of the month, the video had been viewed hundreds of millions of times, translated into dozens of languages, shared in classrooms, community meetings, living rooms. People weren't just repeating Jordan's name, they were repeating his message. Respect is not a reaction, it's a choice. And slowly, imperfectly, unevenly, that idea began to settle into places it had long been absent. America didn't change overnight, but something shifted. A reminder took hold that strength could look like restraint, that courage could sound like calm, that justice could begin with ordinary people refusing to look away. Somewhere far from the noise, Jordan sat quietly sipping his coffee, the same calm expression on his face. Because in the end, he didn't need to throw a punch to win. He had already won where it mattered most. In the hearts of people who saw themselves in him, in the voices that chose to speak instead of stay silent, and in the growing belief that a stronger America is built not on fear, but on empathy, accountability, and love, if we choose it. Every day. What you just watched was not simply a story, it was a mirror A mirror held up to a nation that often looks away when power hurts instead of protects. A mirror reflecting moments too many people know by heart. Moments of being judged, questioned, or diminished before being understood. This wasn't about one slap. It wasn't about one officer. And it wasn't even about one man. It was about a choice. The choice to respond to injustice with cruelty or with conscience. The choice to let fear decide who deserves respect or to let humanity lead instead. The choice to stay silent when something feels wrong or to stand together and say, "This is not who we are." What made this moment powerful wasn't just that wrongdoing was exposed. It was that dignity survived it. A man was humiliated, and he refused to be humiliated back. Power tried to dominate, and restraint answered it. Silence waited, and ordinary people broke it. And in doing so, something important happened. Pain turned into purpose. Witnesses turned into protectors, and accountability became possible. This story reminds us of a truth we can't afford to forget. Racism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through suspicion, through bias, through unchecked authority. But justice doesn't always shout either. Sometimes it stands calmly, breath steady, refusing to disappear. A stronger America is not built by pretending these moments don't exist. It's built when we face them, together, when we listen to stories that make us uncomfortable, when we believe people even if their experience doesn't look like ours, when we help one another, not because we're obligated, but because we're connected. Every act of empathy matters. Every voice that speaks up matters. Every time you choose love over indifference, you are shaping the country we pass on to the next generation. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, reflective, emotional, or hopeful, then it has already begun doing its work. And if you believe that stories like this should be told, remembered, and shared, subscribe to the Racist Reality channel. This channel exists for the stories that too often get ignored, for the voices that deserve to be heard, for the moments that force us to ask hard questions and imagine better answers. Visit the channel and watch more videos, because every story you witness strengthens your empathy, sharpens your awareness, and reminds you that change begins with understanding. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. Thank you for listening with an open heart. And thank you for choosing to be part of something bigger than yourself. Let's keep choosing compassion over cruelty, courage over comfort, love over hate. That is how we build a stronger America, together.